So, Rodney, let's move on. Oh, well, speaking of that, speaking of action in the polls, something you noted in InformedAmerican.com, Biden doesn't bounce. Where's the dead cat? Of course, referring to that dead cat bounce in the stock market. The Democrats had their convention, and as I asked you if you watched, you said no, and that may explain a little bit why there was no bounce, as the Republicans are going through their convention, ending on Thursday, ending last night here as we're sitting here on a Friday. The question remains, will President Trump get a bounce? Will we see what is basically here we are, Rodney, nearly into September. What do you expect? Do you expect to see an RNC bounce, or do you imagine it just to be muted just like the DNC?
Nah, I think it's like, I don't think the conventions are going to offer a bounce because they're not exciting.
Yeah.
And so the way that they've been held because of the pandemic, it's not specific to the Democrats, right. But the Republicans have more pageantry because of the way they did it in different locations. And so I don't know. It looked better when I flipped by it, but I didn't watch it. But we didn't get that same rah, really get excited, see the people in the room, want to be a part of it. Just there was none of that. There was no buildup there. And so that's the problem with it. And so I think that's part of it. I don't think that the protests are helping either, because as we just discussed at length, I think that it hurts the Democrats because it's seen as kind of, their bailiwick of allowing these things to go on, whereas Trump has portrayed himself as law and order. And so I found it very interesting that nobody who spoke at the DNC mentioned the protests. I mean, not once. And so it's like, well, this is a pretty big thing that people are looking at. It's not in every town. It's not in my town. It's not in your town. But it's something that we're certainly watching. And so you would think they would bring it up. But
I don't know, though. I mean, now that I think about it, I think maybe we're just making too much of it. And because we know that these things are mostly peaceful, and there's just, one or two bad actors, possibly agents, saboteurs. So maybe we're just making too much of this, Rodney, or maybe now that this is spilled into Wisconsin, what people in the suburbs think, and potentially a swing state.
I would not want to be in Portland at midnight standing by that federal courthouse. And so anybody who tells me that it's mostly peaceful, I want them to go stand there for 6 nights in a row and kind of tell me how peaceful, and a MAGA hat. And see what happens.
Well, that's just suicide by Antifa, basically.